Title: The Lucky Ball Saga, Episode 4. Luckily, the ball never gets lost. The world felt muted and wrong as Tyler walked to school the next morning. The sky was heavy with clouds, casting a grey pall over the town. It felt like the weight of a secret was pressing down on his shoulders, pulling him deeper into a dark, surreal nightmare. He couldn't escape. Sarah hadn't believed him yesterday, not fully anyway, but she had seen the look in his eyes and agreed to help him investigate. The sooner he could make sense of the red ball's eerie hold on him, the sooner he could figure out how to escape its curse. He made it to the schoolyard, eyes scanning the familiar faces of his classmates with a grim sense of dread. Ollie was still in a cast, his arm wrapped up and hanging in a sling as he sat with a few of his friends near the school entrance. Lewis, too, was there, fidgeting and wincing whenever he moved his injured wrist. Tyler swallowed hard, his mind racing back to that day at the park, the laughter, the carefree game of catch, the innocent way they'd all reached for the ball. How could something so simple turn so malicious? He forced himself to take a deep breath, squaring his shoulders. Today he'd find out, he had to. During break, Tyler found Sarah waiting for him in the far corner of the library, surrounded by a stack of dusty old books. She glanced up as he approached, her expression a mix of worry and determination. "I found a few things," she whispered, pushing a book toward him. "It's mostly just myths and urban legends, but, well, it's a start." Tyler looked down at the book, its faded cover bearing the title Hauntings and Curses, the dark history of urban legends. He opened it slowly, his fingers trembling as he turned the brittle pages. One chapter caught his eye, Objects of Misfortune. He skimmed the lines, his stomach tightening as he read stories of cursed objects, objects that brought bad luck or even death to those who possessed them. "There's this one here," Sarah murmured, pointing to a section about a cursed doll. It belonged to a little girl who passed away, and it started showing up in random places, scaring her family. No matter what they did to get rid of it, the doll kept returning. They even tried burning it, but it wouldn't die. Tyler's throat tightened. So, there really are things like that. Objects that have a life of their own. Sarah nodded slowly. "It sounds crazy, but I think that's what we're dealing with. Whatever that red ball is, it doesn't want to be destroyed, and it doesn't want to leave you." Tyler's mind reeled as he remembered the times he'd tried to throw it away, the eerie way it had always come back. The ball didn't just want to be near him, it wanted something from him, and he had no idea what. "But how do we get rid of it?" he whispered, his voice tight with fear. "I can't keep living like this, Sarah. I can't let it hurt anyone else." She bit her lip, her gaze thoughtful. Maybe we're looking at this wrong. Maybe we need to understand why it's doing this. What if it's attached to something? Or someone? Tyler's mind raced. Could the ball be tied to something bigger? Something he hadn't even considered? He remembered the strange pulsing material he'd seen inside it when he tried to split it open. What if that was a clue? Something dark and malevolent seemed to lurk within it, and he realized he'd never really understood its origin. Where had it come from, and why was it targeting him and his friends? He looked back down at the book, his fingers skimming the pages as he searched for anything that might give him answers. That afternoon, Tyler and Sarah left school together, slipping out through the side gate to avoid the usual crowds. They walked in silence, making their way back to the park where everything had started. The playground was eerily quiet, the swings swaying slightly in the breeze. Tyler's heart pounded as he scanned the area, half expecting to see the red ball waiting for him somewhere. "I think we need to retrace our steps," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Maybe if we go back to where we first found it, we'll find some clue about where it came from." They walked across the grassy field to the spot where they'd played catch. The memories came flooding back, Ollie's easy laugh, Sarah's teasing smile, the sun shining down on them as they threw the ball back and forth. It had been such an innocent, carefree moment, but now it felt like a lifetime ago. As they reached the spot, Tyler noticed something strange. The grass was flattened in a perfect circle, as though something heavy had been sitting there. He knelt down, his fingers brushing over the ground, feeling a chill run down his spine. "Look at this," he whispered, glancing up at Sarah. "It's like something left a mark here." Sarah crouched beside him, her eyes widening as she traced the circle with her fingers. "This doesn't look natural," she murmured. "It's like something's been burned into the ground." Tyler felt a wave of nausea, his mind racing. What if the ball wasn't just a toy, but something far older and darker? Something that had been lying in wait, waiting for someone like him to stumble upon it. I think the ball might have a history we don't know about," he said, his voice shaky. Maybe it's tied to this place, or something that happened here. Sarah's eyes narrowed. Do you know if anyone else has ever had accidents in this park? Anything strange, Tyler thought back, but nothing came to mind. Not that I know of, but I suppose we could ask around. Maybe someone knows something. That evening, Tyler and Sarah decided to pay a visit to Mrs. Carmichael, the elderly woman who lived near the park and was known for her knowledge of the town's history. She'd been a teacher once, and though she was now retired, she was always willing to share stories and gossip about the past. They knocked on her door, and after a few moments she appeared, peering at them through her thick glasses. Tyler, Sarah, what brings you two here? Tyler glanced at Sarah, then took a deep breath. We wanted to ask you about the park. Specifically, if anything strange has ever happened there. Mrs. Carmichael's face softened with curiosity. Oh, the park. That's an odd question, but yes, there have been a few strange things over the years. She invited them inside, and they sat in her cozy living room, listening as she recounted stories of accidents and odd occurrences. Kids falling off swings, breaking bones, strange noises at night, things that people had mostly brushed off as bad luck or overactive imaginations. But there was one story, she said, lowering her voice as if she were sharing a secret. It's not well known, but I remember it well. Years ago there was a little girl, Emily was her name. She loved playing with a red ball in that very park. Tyler's stomach turned cold. A red ball? Mrs. Carmichael nodded, her expression grave. She was a sweet girl, always laughing, always playing. But one day she had an accident. Fell off the jungle gym and broke her neck. They said she lost her grip, that it was a freak accident. But some people believed that there was something more to it. They said the ball was cursed, that it somehow led her to her death. Sarah glanced at Tyler, her eyes wide. And no one ever found the ball after that? Mrs. Carmichael shook her head. No, it vanished after her accident, and no one saw it again. Some people thought it was buried with her, but others believed. Well, they believed it was waiting for someone else. Tyler's mind raced, his heart pounding with a mixture of horror and understanding. Emily's ball hadn't disappeared. It had been waiting, lying dormant in the park, until he and his friends had stumbled upon it. Thank you, Mrs. Carmichael, he said quietly, standing up. You've been really helpful. As they left her house, Tyler felt a heavy weight settle on his chest. He knew now what he had to do. That night, Tyler waited until his parents were asleep before slipping out of the house, carrying the red ball in his backpack. Sarah met him near the park, her face pale but determined. We need to end this, he said, his voice barely a whisper. It's not just an accident, Magnet. It's something else, something dark. They made their way to the center of the park, back to the spot where they'd found the ball. Tyler set it down, staring at it for a long moment, feeling a strange mix of fear and sadness. Emily's life had been cut short because of it, and now it was trying to claim him and his friends too. What do we do now? Sarah asked, her voice trembling. Tyler thought back to the stories Mrs. Carmichael had told them, the legends about cursed objects and how they could be banished. We need to destroy it, he said finally, not just break it. We need to make sure it's gone, once and for all. They spent the next hour digging a hole, working in silence, their breaths visible in the chilly night air. The ground was hard and cold, but they kept going, driven by a sense of urgency. Tyler's hands ached, his fingers numb as he gripped the small garden spade he'd taken from his dad's shed. He glanced at Sarah, who was equally worn out, but just as determined. They both knew there was no turning back now. Finally, the hole was deep enough. Tyler picked up the red ball, its surface dull in the moonlight. Even after everything they'd learned, it still looked innocent, almost inviting. But he knew better. He felt the weight of it, the strange power pulsing beneath its rubbery surface, as though it was waiting for something, waiting for them to make a mistake. Are you sure this will work? Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Tyler hesitated, then nodded. I have to believe it will. If we bury it deep enough, maybe. Maybe it'll stay down there. They both took a deep breath as Tyler lowered the ball into the hole. For a moment he felt a strange pang, almost like regret, as though he was saying goodbye to something that had become a part of him. But then he remembered Ollie's broken arm, Lewis's injured wrist, and all the accidents that had followed them since that fateful day at the park. Goodbye, he whispered, covering the ball with dirt. He pressed the earth down, packing it as tightly as he could, hoping it would be enough to trap the ball forever. They worked together, filling in the hole, then smoothing the ground until it looked undisturbed, just like the rest of the field. They stepped back, staring at the freshly covered earth. For the first time in days, Tyler felt a glimmer of hope, a sense that maybe, just maybe, they'd done it. The next day at school, Tyler felt lighter. For the first time in what felt like ages, he could focus in class, even laugh with his friends. Lewis, Ollie, and the others seemed to be doing better too, their injuries healing and their spirits lifted. It was as if a dark cloud had finally lifted from all of them. But Tyler couldn't fully shake the memory of the ball, the way it had seemed to watch him, almost waiting for something. Part of him still feared it would come back, but he tried to push the thought away. They'd buried it, hidden it deep in the earth. Surely that was enough. Days turned into weeks, and gradually life returned to normal. Tyler stopped looking over his shoulder, stopped dreading each new day. The accidents faded into memory, and he began to feel like himself again. But one evening, as Tyler was walking home from a friend's house, he spotted something red out of the corner of his eye. He froze, his heart racing, his mind flashing back to the nightmare he thought he'd escaped. Slowly he turned, his eyes locking onto a familiar shape lying by the side of the road. The red ball. It sat there perfectly clean, its surface unmarred despite everything he'd done to it. Tyler felt a chill run down his spine, a sickening realization sinking in. The ball hadn't stayed buried. It had come back just like it always had. He took a step back, his body tense, his mind racing. He couldn't do this again. He couldn't keep running, keep fighting something that refused to be destroyed. But he also knew he couldn't just leave it there, not with the knowledge of what it could do. As he stared at the ball, a thought struck him, a final, desperate idea. He picked up his phone, quickly dialing Sarah's number. She answered after a few rings, her voice groggy with sleep. "Tyler, what's going on?" "It's back," he whispered, his voice trembling. "The ball, it's back." There was a pause, and he heard Sarah's sharp intake of breath. "But we buried it. We did everything we could." "I know," he replied, his voice hollow. "But it doesn't matter. It won't stay gone. We have to do something else, something drastic." "What do you mean?" Tyler glanced around, making sure no one was watching, then picked up the ball. It felt warm in his hands, almost alive. I think we have to take it as far away as possible. Somewhere it can't come back from." "Like where?" Tyler hesitated, then remembered an old quarry on the outskirts of town, a place known for its deep, murky water and steep cliffs. It was a place people rarely visited, a place where things could be forgotten. "The quarry," he said finally. "We'll drop it in the water. It's the only way." That night, Tyler and Sarah met at the edge of the quarry, the moon casting a pale glow over the dark water below. The place was eerily quiet, the only sounds the rustling of leaves and the distant croak of frogs. Tyler felt a shiver run down his spine as he looked down at the water, imagining the endless depths waiting below. "Are you sure about this?" Sarah asked, glancing at him nervously. He nodded, clutching the red ball in his hands. "This is our last chance, if this doesn't work. I don't know what else we can do." They approached the edge of the cliff, staring down at the water far below. Tyler took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the ball in his hands, the strange energy pulsing beneath its surface. He'd come to hate this thing, to fear it, but now in this final moment he felt almost sad. It was a strange, inexplicable feeling, as though he were letting go of a part of himself. "Goodbye," he whispered, lifting the ball above his head. With all his strength he hurled it over the edge, watching as it tumbled down, 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 disappearing into the darkness below. A faint splash echoed through the night, and then silence. They stood there for a long time, waiting, watching the water for any sign that the ball might resurface. But the water remained still, calm, as though it had swallowed the ball whole. Tyler felt a strange sense of relief, a feeling of finality that he hadn't expected. "It's over," he murmured, turning to Sarah with a weary smile. "We did it," she smiled back, her eyes shining with relief. "Let's go home." Tyler walked back alone, feeling lighter than he had in weeks. The night air was cool, the stars bright above him, and for the first time he felt like he could breathe again. The ball was gone, lost in the depths of the quarry, where it could hurt no one. He'd won, but as he stepped onto the road leading to his neighborhood, a blinding light flashed in his eyes. He turned, squinting, only to realize too late that a car was speeding towards him. There was no time to move, no time to think. He felt the impact, a sharp, brutal force that sent him tumbling to the ground. The last thing he saw, just before everything went dark, was a flash of red, a small familiar ball bouncing down the road, as though it were watching him. Waiting. The town mourned Tyler's loss, the tragic accident that had claimed his life too soon. His friends and family grieved, haunted by the memory of a boy who had been full of life, taken from them in the blink of an eye. But on certain nights, when the wind was just right, Some people claimed they could hear the faint sound of a ball bouncing, echoing through the empty streets. And every so often, children would find a small red ball lying in the park, inviting them to play. No one knew where it came from, but those who touched it, they always met with strange accidents, as though the ball was seeking something or someone. And so the curse continued, passed from one unsuspecting child to the next, the red ball forever bound to the souls it claimed, waiting patiently for its next game to begin.